This video is part 2 to my previous video. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly encourage you to do so. And if not, well, I'm not the boss of you. So, yeah, enjoy the video. From the treasure bag, I got a Seedler and a Pygmy Staff, which I was very happy about. I've been enjoying using melee a lot, and the Seedler will be a fun weapon to use for whatever boss I choose to take on next. I don't really give a shit about the Pygmy Staff, but I got that too. So what's next? Well, I'm finally approaching the end of the game, and there are a few different boss routes I can go down. How about Golem? Dog, that's boring. This would be the boss that makes the most sense, but it wouldn't be in the spirit of this challenge. He wouldn't be difficult at all, and even after I kill him, I would still probably need to kill another boss to get a weapon sufficient enough for the pillars. Killing that other boss would be made much easier with a Golem tier weapon, and it just wouldn't be fun or interesting. The next option is the Empress of Light. The problem with the Empress of Light is that for how much prep goes into the fight, you just don't gain anything from killing her. Look, I'm sorry, but the Nightglow and Starlight are shit. They're trash. The Avantai is just a worse tsunami. The Kaleidoscope is actually a pretty good summoning weapon, relative to the rest of the summoner class, which is all shit. The Stellar Tune? Yeah, let me just fight 20 Empress of Lights real quick. And the most appealing drop, the Soaring Insignia, I can't even use. The last option is Duke Fishron. Wait, you forgot about the Terra Prisma. No, I didn't. Shut the hell up. If you can't tell by now, this is the boss I'm leaning towards. It's a hard boss fight, and everything he drops is great, with the exception of the Tempest Staff. Look, I'm sorry, this class just isn't good. I'll be able to kill both Golem and the Lunatic Cultist, and most of the Fishron weapons do really well against the pillars too. Fighting a tough boss with a Planetara weapon will be nice for a change as well. These weapons are replaced by Golem drops so fast that you never even get a chance to appreciate them. With all that being said, Duke Fishron is certainly the winner of the 3 options, so I got right to work on preparing for him. First off, I forgot to mention I got a hollowed key sometime while building the arena. The rainbow gun isn't amazing, but it'll be nice to have around, so I went to go grab it. The dungeon serves as a good spot to test the effectiveness of the Seedler, and needless to say, I wasn't super impressed. It took a lot longer to kill the armored bones than I expected it to, which made me wonder how it would perform against Duke Fishron. I found the hollow chest with little exploring and returned home with my new rainbow gun. As much as I'd like to say there was more to do, it's another situation like Planetara where there just really isn't a whole lot of upgrades available. Yeah, I could grind out some better accessories with like emblems and all that, but I don't think I really need to. Plus, I think it's kind of funny that I've still used a shield through the whole run, despite not even being able to dash. This shit's so OP, I don't even need a dash to find use out of it. Anyways, all I needed from here was some truffle worms. I saw on my map there was a large mushroom biome right below my base, so I took a shortcut down to it. I could have used the mushroom biome my pylon was located in, but I wasn't sure the NPCs would affect truffle worm spawn rate. The truffle worm farming was trouble-free. What's nice about Duke Fishron is that his summon is so much easier to get than the other bosses. No grinding out souls or digging around the jungle forever, just collecting bugs. I wrapped up the farming by sacrificing myself for these last 2 worms, and after 4 minutes, I was walking away with 5 truffle worms. I knew I had an extra one from earlier in one of my chests too, so in total, I had 6 Duke Fishron summons. I headed over to the ocean to start working on an arena. Usually, I opt for 2 far apart platforms, but I thought 3 slightly closer platforms would be better due to my limited vertical mobility. As I made the arena, I was constantly attacked by harpies and wyverns, but there really wasn't much I could do about it except hope they wouldn't spawn during the fight. I placed down some campfires and heart lanterns, grabbed my buffs, and all of a sudden, I was ready for Fishron. I got started right away. It's been a little while since I fought Duke Fishron, so I was expecting it to take a few attempts. The first phase, as is typical with most bosses, is very easy. The main thing you need to look out for are the 2 Sharknadoes, but other than that, it's basically just an endurance test until you get him to half health. In the meantime, I'd like to talk about the Duke Fishron fight as a whole. For one, I'm sure many of you are aware that Duke Fishron can be fought as soon as you enter hard mode. I always love this about him. I think it's a really fun and rewarding challenge to anyone looking to spend 30 minutes eroding him with a plating repeater. It's like the Grand Canyon if you think about it. All that time spent chipping him down until you're eventually left with this beautiful feature of the game. This begs the question, why didn't I do this in this run? Similar to what I said about Golem earlier, I felt that this kind of progression skip wasn't in the spirit of the challenge. Getting one of Duke Fishron's weapons will literally carry you to the pillars with ease, or in the Tempest Staff's case, your first mechanical boss. Either way, I thought it would be more fun to run through the normal progression of the game, rather than grind out a single boss forever until I beat him. Anyways, Duke Fishron has just entered his 2nd phase, and now's where I really needed to start focusing. interesting. The second phase of Fishron is essentially a super buff version of the first phase. Instead of doing 5 mini dashes, he does 3 blazing charges. Instead of just shooting bubbles, he does like 30 flips as well. And worst of all, instead of shooting 2 cute little Sharknadoes, he summons 1 giant-ass Cthulhu-nado. I mean, what the hell? Unlike the Sharknadoes, the Cthulhu-nados last for 15 seconds as opposed to 8. They spawn below the player rather than below Fishron, and they're big as shit. Goddamn. The Cthulhu-nado is the main thing that separates the first phase from the second phase. Its extended uptime means that by the time one dissipates, Fishron is already summoning another, meaning there is always a Cthulhu-nado to watch out for. The homing characteristic of the projectile allows for manipulation of where the Cthulhu-nado spawns in. By letting it hit you at just the right time, you can set the Cthulhu-nado to be out of your way for the most part. And you're gonna want it out of your way, because goddamn, the shipping is hard! There's so much potential for strategy that just feeds into why I love this boss so much. Even with all this, I still got a third phase to worry about. But unfortunately, this is not going to be the fight to cover it, as just as I was about to reach 15% health mark, he got me. Overall, a great first fight. Even without a dash or wings, I was evading Duke Fishron just fine. And going against what I had thought before, the Seedler was doing a solid job whittling him down. Still, I wanted to give it another go. So I grabbed my buffs, came back, and summoned him again. What the hell is going on? Yeah, let's cut to the chase. I ended up dying at around the same place I did in the first fight, but this time, instead of jumping back at the fight, I decided I wanted an upgrade. One of the things I knew I could fall back on was the Fire Gauntlet. I had everything to craft it except for an extra emblem, so all I would need to do was kill the Wall of Flesh once. I grabbed some very primitive buffs and made my way down to hell, but after realizing I forgot a water walking potion, it gave me the opportunity to rethink my decision. I think part of me was worried I'd be stuck on Duke Fishron for a lot longer than anticipated. At the same time though, I felt a little guilty for not continuing to try. In the end, I changed my mind. I wanted to fight Duke Fishron as initially intended, thus I recalled back to base, grabbed more buffs, and went back for a third attempt. This time, I went to the fight with a plan rather than simply trying again. In the last 2 fights, my movement had been very sloppy, and I was looking to correct that. First off, I found myself caught in the space layer way too often. The lower gravity makes falling very slow, and all I can do is pray not to get hit. Even worse, at a certain height, I'm no longer considered to be in the ocean biome anymore, and Duke Fishron enters his rage mode. The second reason to correct my movement is because of something I've already mentioned previously. The Cthulhu-nados. Holy mackerel. For the first phase, I worked on dodging Duke Fishron in smaller areas rather than guiding him across the whole arena. This will greatly benefit me in the second phase, where the Cthulhu-nados essentially lessen the size of the arena I had to work with. Anyways, we all know this first phase was never going to be a problem, so it's time to get to the second phase. Just as I entered the second phase, I used the downtime to summon a rainbow, which proved to be very useful, as the rainbow can be used to pop bubbles. Especially in the second phase, the bubbles can take up a lot of room, which just like space and the Cthulhu-nado. No, we're done with this shit! Just like space and the Cthulhu-nado, the bubbles hinder my mobility even further. Popping the bubbles as soon as they spawned in made focusing on the other aspects of the fight a lot easier, so I continued to use the rainbow strategy for the rest of the second phase. I made it to the third phase at the perfect time, just as the last Cthulhu-nado was disappearing. The third phase is very straightforward. Duke Fishron teleports behind you, dashes anywhere between 1 and 3 times, and you must dodge accordingly. Now, I'm about to sound like a complete dumbass to most of you, but I had no idea that the dashes followed a pattern. To those of you who are uninformed like me, the third phase follows a very basic cycle. He dashes once, he dashes twice, he dashes 3 times, and the cycle repeats. All this time I thought the dash count was random, but now that I know it isn't, it's almost a little sad. Not only because I've wasted hours of my life dying to this final phase for the last 6 years, but also because the bullshit feeling of having to react to everything sort of made the phase special. On the bright side, this would make for a pretty cool buff to Duke Fishron. That is a topic for another day, however, as despite the massive handicap of having no clue what I was doing, Duke Fishron was dead, and for my efforts, I received a flare on. It's always a good feeling to get your hands on a Duke Fishron weapon, and the Flareon is no exception. I've known for a long time how good it was, and I've used it many times, but unless you rush Fishron at the start of hard mode, it's not a weapon that you get to use for very long. Luckily, since I opted to kill Fishron before Golem, I'll be able to play around with it for a little while. On the topic of the fight itself, it appears my new strategies worked. During the second phase, I had a good back and forth rhythm, which was ideal for avoiding the Cthulhu-nados. On top of that, the Rainbow Gun was a huge help dealing with all the bubbles, especially when you consider the Seedler was never too great at that to begin with. After embarrassing myself by dying to this fourth summon, Duke Fishron robbed me of all the money I earned from the last fight, and I went home. Immediately, I reforged my Flareon, getting godly on the first try. The next course of action was to fight Golem. Alongside everything I would normally take to a boss fight, I also carried a Danger Sense potion to help me explore the temple. I've explored all the areas surrounding the temple, so it wasn't very hard to make an educated guess on where the entrance would be. Once I was in, I broke every trap and looted every chest I came across. About halfway down, I realized I would need more wood for platforms, so I quickly mined all the trees I had planted previously and returned to the temple afterwards. Eventually, I made it to Golem's secret lair, cleared out all the enemies, set up a platform, campfire, heart lantern, and boom, Golem. There really isn't a whole lot to say about Golem. The best way I find to go about fighting him is killing both of his fists before the head gets too low. Once the head gets low, it starts shooting lasers and fireballs more frequently, and having the fists around at that time is just another thing to worry about. Although Golem is a notoriously easy boss, and still is, there are a few buffs he's received in the 1.4.4 update that are worth noting. First off, he's gotten a 60% health increase to each of his segments. Sounds scary, but it really doesn't make him any more threatening, just makes the fight take longer. Also, his fists can no longer be deflected. I'm sure many of you remember that prior to this update, if you did any damage to Golem's fists while they were launched at you, they would instantly retract back to the body. This was kind of a janky mechanic anyways. Oftentimes you could hit the fists early, thinking they retract, but they would shoot instead and... whatever, you guys get the point. Lastly, Golem's fists now have this neat fire animation when they're about to launch. This isn't a buff, but I just thought it was cool. Back to the fight. As you can all see, I've been getting absolutely clapped up. Maybe I was too cocky going into it or something, but I played like I had my eyes closed the whole time. It was only a matter of time before I died and was sent back to spawn. Although I was a little thrown off balance by that first fight, all I could do was try again. At the end of the day, it's Golem. No matter how many times I die to him, if I can't beat him with the gear I have now, then the run's over. I'm screwed. I came back to his secret lair, killed this Hollow Mimic, and jumped right into another Golem attempt. There isn't much to talk about this time. I haven't changed my strategy at all. I literally just use my brain more. Anyways, I did manage to kill him this time, and from here on, I continue to burn through all the summons I had. The sole reason I'm fighting Golem is because he's required to progress. The only thing I could possibly want from him is the Eye of the Golem, but other than that, I can sell off everything I get. This will yield me nearly a whole platinum for each Golem I kill, which should be plenty to get me through the rest of the game. Of the 4 summons I had, not including the first attempt, I was able to kill Golem 3 times before dying to the 4th summon. Once I respawned, I opened all the treasure bags I had and headed down to the Goblin Tinker. While I didn't end up getting an Eye of the Golem, there were still a few things I realized I wanted to keep. First, the Possessed Hatchet. It fills a similar purpose to that of the Flareon, but I kept it around just in case I would need pure single target damage for whatever reason. I held on to both the Shiny Stone and Pixel for my own convenience. And lastly, the Staff of Earth has had some changes since the last time I used it, and I wanted to try it out. Other than that, I sold off everything else and was left with around 2.5 platinum. With all the new money I had, I took it as an opportunity to reforge more of my accessories to be either lucky or menacing, and all of a sudden, I was ready for the Cultist. The Lunatic Cultist is yet another boss that's not necessarily known for its difficulty. In most runs, he's probably even easier than Golem to be honest, and this can lend him to be one of the more forgettable bosses in the game. On top of being easy, he doesn't drop anything interesting, nor is he a very intimidating figure, which both don't help his case. Despite all of this isn't a normal run. Typically, this fight is fought primarily in the air, whether it be by using a good pair of wings or the UFO mount. With me being stuck to the ground for the most part, I don't really know how this will affect the fight, so the Lunatic Cultist may be harder than anticipated. But let's see how I do. I killed off all the Sigil guys and summoned the Lunatic Cultist. The first cycle was not so bad. I knew what to expect, I could avoid all the attacks just fine, and even when I did get hit, it didn't do much damage. As soon as the first ritual hit though, I slipped up. One of the Flareon bubbles lingered a little longer than I would have liked, and hit a decoy. Look, I knew this was bad, but I thought the Phantasmal Dragon was basically just a reskinned Wyvern. It's not. Like at all. For starters, this thing has 20,000 health. That's a third of what the actual boss has. It's also way faster and moves like a complete weirdo. I was getting the dragon very low, and it was looking like I'd survived the encounter, until... You're kidding. Holy shit. Seriously, what am I even looking at? Oh my god, what the hell is going on? That was the worst first attempt at a boss I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. The crazy thing is that the fight really wasn't that hard until I summoned that stupid dragon, and from there on, it was just an enormous downward spiral. I was honestly so shocked the fight could get that bad that I looked into it a little more on the wiki. The way the ritual works is that if you hit a decoy or let the ritual go on for more than 5 seconds, a dragon is summoned, which in my opinion is plenty. But the devs at Relogic must have had other plans in mind. On top of the dragon being summoned, any decoys you didn't kill will shoot shadow balls alongside the cultists' regular attacks. What's with the overkill? All this just because I accidentally hit some stupid ass decoy? Whatever. It was clear to me that on my next attempt, I had to avoid hitting a decoy at all costs. By now you should know that I'm too stubborn to get any upgrades for the next attempt, so once I thought the sigil guys had respawned, I made my way over to the dungeon. Even though the last attempt was probably the most brutal ass whoop we ever seen in this game to date, I still wholeheartedly believe this fight is super easy so long as I just don't hit a decoy. At the start of the fight, I mostly used a possessed hatchet. I'd eventually swap over to the flare on later in the fight, but for now I just wanted some more control over my attacks. While I was looking at the wiki earlier, I learned more about how his attack pattern works. In the first phase, the lunatic cultist cycles through the following attacks: fire, ice, lightning, and the cycle repeats. Every 6th attack is replaced by a ritual, meaning the attack right before the ritual will always be ice. If it sounds easy, it's because it is. The second phase isn't much different, if you can even call it a phase to begin with. The only thing that changes is the attack pattern, where now every 7th attack is replaced by a ritual, and every normal attack has a chance to be replaced by either the Ancient Light or Ancient Doom. If it sounds easy, it's because it is. If I haven't made it clear by now, this fight is easy as shit. All I had to do was not summon the dragon. I hate this stupid dragon! How do you even dodge this thing? Another death, but now I know I can kill him. I slept the night away and went to go summon him again. It was the 3rd attempt, and this time I had a new trick up my sleeve. I brought along a musket with high velocity bullets to make the ritual go a little easier for me. Alongside this, instead of waiting until the second phase to start moving into my main arena, I did so as soon as the fight began. Alright, let's see how I do. Why do I even use this weapon? What kind of boss is a literal instant kill attack like this anyways? Yeah, I'm done. I wasn't done. Attempt 4, and this time, after a long, patient battle, the lunatic cultist was dead. There's not much to cover that I haven't talked about already. I just focused on remembering when the ritual would start and avoided hitting the decoys as best as possible, even if there were some close calls. Now that the lunatic cultist was dead, it was time for the pillars, and soon after, Moonlord. Right away, the Stars pillar happened to spawn directly on top of me, so while I farm some star cells, I'll explain the final plan I have for this run. First off, I can't believe I'm finally approaching Moonlord. It's been a long way coming, but I'm ready to put an end to the run. I can almost guarantee that Moonlord will be the hardest boss I fight. He's probably the most flight-reliant boss in the game. The chip damage from all his minor attacks will burn right through my 4 defense. And on top of everything else, I've never been very good at this fight to begin with. Despite all this, as long as I have a weapon that does enough damage to kill him within a reasonable time period, I'll be able to take him down. As for what weapon I'll use, I have all the pillar weapons to choose from, but I think I'm leaning towards melee. I'll talk more about the pros and cons of the different pillar weapons as I get to their respective pillars. Starting with the Stardust pillar. We all already knew I wasn't going to use these, but I'd like to actually explain why rather than just saying Summoner sucks. Which is exactly what I've done up to this point. The main issue in Summoner lies in the AI. To keep it brief, a lot of summons simply have trouble hitting enemies, most notably flying or fast enemies. I will admit, the most recent summons Relogic has added have been a lot better with this. Even more recently, many old summons have been receiving buffs to their AI, which is fantastic, but at the end of the day, being able to aim a weapon yourself will always be more consistent. The other reason, specific to this run, is the armor. Compared to every other class, Summoner is by far the most reliant on armor. Let me give you an example. Shroomite armor, the pre-Moonlord range set, grants 28% damage, 25% crit chance, a bunch of other random stats, 51 defense, and a lousy ass set bonus that's never practical. On the other hand, Spooky armor, the pre-Moonlord summoner set, grants 58% damage, 4 minion slots, and 30 defense. So while summoner and ranged may perform equally as well with armor, ranged is way better without it, as it simply loses less. Even though I've barely used summoner in this run, I do still think it's a really cool class. I know it does not sound like that at all, but seriously, I do. I love how Relogic has turned the class into something actually viable. The addition of whips provides a more active playstyle, and the most recent summons they've added fill in some very important gaps in progression. I'm mostly exaggerating when I make fun of Summoner, I just like to make jokes about it. Speaking of jokes, the starter cell staff is terrible. It's time to get back on track, and this thing just sucks ass. It sucks ass. Believe it or not, it's not even because of its AI. It just does no damage. I cannot believe this thing has not been buffed yet. With that out of the way, the starter's dragon staff is actually really good. Its damage is well in line with all the other classes, maybe even a little higher. But, unfortunately, I have no armor, so it's not my best option for this run. I know that was quite a lot, but I felt it was pretty important to mention. Anyways, the shield was down, and I was kind of just chipping away at the pillar. The problem was there were so many enemies surrounding it, luring all the bubbles away from the pillar and making it nearly impossible to avoid taking damage. Still, I didn't have much else I could do about it. I died a few times, and eventually, I took a moment to harvest some plants. While I did so, I noticed my map was glitched, but it's no problem. I'll just reset my game real quick and continue where I left off. There we go. Much better. You guys are lucky this show is the Stardust Pillar, because if it were anything else, the video would be over by now. Well, guess we're back to this again. While I farm some star cells, I'll explain the final plan I have for this. Once I finished breaking the shield, again, I took the star cells to space and teleported home to get them to despawn. This time around, I was going to use the rainbow gun instead of the flare-on for killing the pillars. With the rainbow gun, all it takes is one shot and the pillar will slowly melt away with little to no effort on my part. Hey, work smarter, not harder. Ow! What the? That's alright, should just take one rainbow anyway. Here we go. What? How did I even mess this up? Finally. Yeah, eat shit, star cell. What the hell? The first rainbow wasn't quite enough to finish off the pillar. Eventually, I managed to get a second one off, and after one death and another one of this. Such bullshit. The Stardust Pillar was dead, and I was able to collect all the fragments. Man, that took a while. Good thing there's only 3 more to go. No, being completely serious, it's really not going to be that bad. I'll talk more about this in a bit, but for now, it's time for the next pillar. The next pillar I wanted to go for was the solar pillar. Unfortunately, it's a little out of the way, but it'll be worth it to finally get my hands on a lunar weapon. Damn, what do you know them plants for? Shut up. When I'm fighting Moonlord, I'm gonna want a big platform spanning across the world, so I started expanding the top row of my current arena on the way over to the pillar. I made it about 100 blocks before I was stopped by the nebula pillar, to which I jumped over top of, killed a nebula floater, and started grinding out the solar pillar. Back to what I mentioned previously, what makes the pillars not so bad anymore? I know I've talked about this many times by now, but the 1.4.4 update has fixed so much stuff. As most of you probably remember, the pillars used to suck. They were miserable. In Master Mode, you had to kill 200 enemies, all of which were the most bullshit enemies in the game. In 1.4.4, although a lot of these enemies were left unchanged, some of the really bad ones were nerfed. Also in the new update, you not only need to kill 100 enemies, no matter what difficulty you play on, and the Celestial Sigil, Moonlord Summon, only costs 12 of each fragment instead of 20. There are genuinely so many runs I've gotten demotivated and stopped playing simply because of the pillars. So I'm very happy with what Relogic has done. Moving on, the solar weapons are both very powerful, but they serve very different roles. The Daybreak is a high-range, high single-target damage weapon, while the Solar Eruption is more crowd control-oriented. Both weapons inflict the Daybroken debuff, which deals 100 damage per second. Usually, I could not care any less about a debuff that isn't I-core, and even 100 damage per second isn't super impressive. The Daybreak, however, is special in that it can stack this debuff up to 8 times, dealing a maximum of 800 damage per second. Do the math! Although the Daybreak does way more single target damage, the Solar Eruption is by far more versatile. Not only can the Solar Eruption completely ignore walls, but it's also way easier to hit targets with. While the Daybreak requires hitting precise shots against enemies, the Solar Eruption is probably the most brain-dead weapon in the game. Back when Moonlord arenas looked like this, the Solar Eruption was undoubtedly the better weapon in most cases. As it stands though, you actually need to fight Moonlord now, so the Daybreak definitely seems to fit my needs more. Soon enough, the solar pillar shield was down. I ran in there, rainbowed the pillar, ran away, and then sat patiently. The solar pillar was surprisingly easy. It really made me wonder how the hell I managed to die like 10 times to the Stardust pillar. Nevertheless, I rainbowed the pillar one more time and collected all the fragments. Once I got back to the base, I crafted the Daybreak. The Daybreak should be the last weapon I craft for the rest of the run, meaning I could spend all the money I had on getting the best modifier for it. After about 2 platinum, I did get its best modifier, Demonic, and this is basically the setup I'll have for Moonlord. All that's left for me now is to finish off the pillars, build a big platform in the air, and start attempts at killing Moonlord. The next pillar I wanted to kill was the Nebula pillar. It didn't really matter what pillar I killed next, but at least once the Nebula pillar was down, I'd have room to work on the Moonlord platform. Although I'm not using the Nebula weapons, I still would like to finish what I've started and compare them. The Nebula Blaze and Arcanum are similar to the Solar weapons, in that the Nebula Blaze functions as a high single target damage weapon, while the Nebula Arcanum is better against groups. The Nebula Blaze looks really cool when you hold it, but when you actually think about how it functions, it doesn't do anything special. No pierce, no explosions, hell up until recently it didn't even have knockback. It literally just does a shit ton of damage. This makes it sound like a lame ass weapon, but in a way, it kinda makes it cooler. It's fun to have a weapon that's sole purpose is to mow down a single target and nothing else. Plus it looks awesome. The Nebula Arcanum is another simpler weapon. It shoots big ass bombs that explode upon hitting 3 enemies. To me, the Arcanum feels like the real endgame rocket launcher of this game, as against single targets, it can be very hard to land, but in large groups, it just blows up everything. And I know you guys saw this coming, but these are barely rocket launchers. They're cool weapons, but rocket launchers don't shoot like that. The Nebula Arcanum also looks awesome when you hold it. As far as I know, these are the only weapons that actually have a visual when they aren't actively being used. I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting, but that's always been a cool feature of the two weapons. With a lot more deaths than I probably should have had, I killed the Nebula Pillar and collected all the fragments. It's worth noting that while I grinded out the pillar, I swapped my Shield of Cthulhu for the Feral Claws. In case you don't know, the Daybreak is affected by melee speed a little different than other weapons. Instead of increasing the rate at which the Daybreaks are thrown, melee speed increases the velocity of the projectiles. To me, an extra 12% velocity from the Feral Claws was much better than the 2 defense from the Shield of Cthulhu, so I swapped the two. Other than that, nothing has changed. This is the gear I plan to fight Moonlord with, so with the new space I have from killing the Nebula Pillar, I started constructing the arena. The thing about Moonlord is that he's probably the only boss in the game where the circle strat is ineffective. He's simply too giant of a boss to sufficiently loop around and not end up getting cornered by as many different attacks. Back in the day, people got around this by just tanking the shit out of everything, but this is not possible anymore. A few years ago, Moonlord's most infamous attack, the Phantasmal Death Ray, was granted the ability to go through blocks, rendering the classic box strat completely useless. Unfortunately, now you have to actually fight the boss. On the bright side though, at least we have to imagine the amount of people unaware of this change in 1.4. The amount of people who spent well over an hour building an arena, fishing for a prismite, setting up campfires, heart lanterns, and honey, just to get one shot by a giant 450 damage death ray and waste all of their time. I guess while I'm on the topic of the death ray, I may as well talk about how it will affect me. First of all, before anyone gets smart, I cannot afford to get hit by it. Ever. Oh, well, if you do the math, it actually only comes out to 367 damage. Shut up! If I get hit for 367 damage, there's a 0% chance I can recover from that, so I'll have to avoid it. The reason I'm bringing this up is because avoiding the death ray could actually pose a threat to me. If I don't have the vertical mobility to get over his top eye, I'm toast. Now, it's only a 60-degree sweep, so as long as I stay fairly low to the ground, I should have plenty of room to get above it. But things don't always go as planned, and if it does become a problem, I may need to either build an extra platform or go for another bottle variation. However, worrying about my jump height may lead to another problem. Space. We've already determined that space is bad. What the hell is going on? The combination of the Featherfall potion and the low gravity means the wolf just floats forever, and I'm almost guaranteed to take damage. Yet again, as long as I stay low, I should be fine, but all it takes is one instance of getting stuck up there, and half my health is gone. In about 40 minutes, the arena was complete, and I was now fully ready to fight Moonlord. I'll talk more about my strategy once I'm actually in the fight, but for now, it was time to kill the last pillar, the Vortex Pillar. And as I do so, why not talk about the arena? The arena is basically a giant open area for dodging and running. Typically, a lot of Moonlord's attacks would be considered chip damage, but because it lacks so much defense, everything will do well over 100 damage to me. To compensate, I needed a big arena with no obstructions to fully focus on avoiding every attack, and this arena is just that. It consists of a large platform high off the ground, a clear sky above the platform, and 2 teleports connecting the ends of the arena. The platform serves as a flat area to run on without any mountains or lakes. The sky is void of any floating islets that could have gotten in the way, and the teleports are an easy escape route if I do happen at the edge of the arena. The teleports are mostly relevant in the second phase, as they'll come to see, but yeah, that's the arena. On to the Vortex weapons. With the right ammo, both the Vortex Speeder and Phantasm are incredible against Moonlord. It's basically just preference as to which one you use. Now for the Phantasm, you can really get away with any ammo. Usually this means Venom Arrows, as they have the highest base damage and velocity, but it doesn't matter very much. The Vortex Speeder, on the other hand, is a different story. Instead of having every option, you have one option: Chlorophyte bullets. The Vortex Speeder is a 25-degree spread. Dog, let's be honest, you ain't shit with that. By using Chlorophyte bullets, the weapon's made 10 times more reliable and a solid option in most scenarios. This comes with a few drawbacks though. For one, while the Vortex Speeder is more consistent and easy to use, the Phantasm does significantly more damage than it. With an archery potion and a fast arrow, it's not hard to land your shots. Add on a magic quiver, and the shots are basically a hit scan. So unless you're blind or haven't used a mouse before, the Phantasm is definitely the better option. Also, chlorophyte bullets are expensive. Most arrows in this game are very cheap and give you a whole lot to work with. The chlorophyte bullets, however, only give you 60 rounds per bar. And before anyone even thinks about it, both Vortex weapons have the exact same ammo reduction. This is on top of the fact that the Phantasm adds max speed, not including ghost arrows, which don't consume ammo anyways, shoots 3 times slower than the Vortex Speeder. So although the Vortex Speeder may be more convenient and reliable than the Phantasm in some scenarios, just how convenient can you call mining for chlorophyte all the time? Booyah! Back at the Vortex Pillar, things were going pretty smoothly. Most of my time was spent farming alien queens, and although they had some questionable behavior, what the hell? Overall, it was quite easy. After a few more minutes of grinding out Vortex enemies, the Vortex shield was down. From the moment I break the pillar, I'll only have 60 seconds before Moonlord spawns. So before I did just that, I made sure to grab all the buffs I would need for the fight first. But other than that, there's not much more to be done. I teleported over to the pillar, did as much damage as I could, and waited for the rainbow to ship it down. Once the pillar was down, I used the fragments to craft 8 super healing potions and got myself into position. Eventually, after 30 of the most suspenseful seconds of my life, finally, I made it to Moonlord. To me, Moonlord has always been a very confusing boss. Lots of his attacks are completely non-telegraphed, and while you can usually get away with tanking most of these, that wasn't going to slide in this run. The biggest problem I faced were these stupid white bolts. Each one of these took out a third of my health, and many times they felt completely unavoidable. Now in this instance, I probably should have kept to the left, but my plan at the time was to remain as far away from it as possible, and ideally this would be on the right where I had the most room. The further away from it I was, the more time I'd have to react to his attacks. For the next death ray, I aim to take advantage of this and remain on the right side of Moonlord. Yeah, 60 degrees my ass, I'm not doing that again. From here on, I just kept making the same mistakes. I had a stroke of luck dodging these 2 bolts and getting up to full health, but this was immediately diminished after I jumped slightly too early for an upcoming death ray. This caused Moonlord's spheres to shoot upwards at a really awkward angle, leading me to getting hit. On the following death ray, it was a similar story, where this time I jumped way too early, got caught in space, and was promptly shot out of the sky. Although that fight definitely could have gone better, I genuinely thought it was a good first attempt. Going into it, I kinda just assumed I would die within the first minute. And I mean, this wasn't much better, but it was something. Despite the fight only lasting about a minute and a half, there was a lot to learn from it, and it helped relieve some of the initial concerns I had. The biggest thing I needed to prioritize in future attempts were the Phantasmal bolts. Outside of one instance, these were the only source of damage I took for the entire fight, which is probably the last thing I expected going into this. Many times I was simply caught off guard by how fast they are, so if I paid just a little more attention to them, I could eliminate a lot of unnecessary damage. Besides a few other smaller mistakes, there really wasn't much else to change. I felt good about the accessories I had, and all I could do now is continue attempts at Moonlord. I had enough fragments left over to craft 3 more summons, so without further ado, let's get started. Ow! God damn it. Whatever, at least I still got 2 more tries. Oh, that's fine. One try will do, I guess. Let's see if we can get a good run going. Somehow I managed to do worse on all 3 attempts, and although I was pissed at the time, my efforts weren't for nothing. As I continued to fight Moonlord, I started to realize that his attacks may not be as random as I originally thought. The biggest giveaway for me was the left hand. Every single time there was a death ray, a few seconds would go by, then the left hand would shoot its bolts. It didn't matter if I was to the left or right either, it was always the left hand that would shoot. This may seem like nothing, but up until this point, these bolts have been basically guaranteed to hit me, and now that I know how they function, I may actually have a shot at being able to dodge them. However big or small this discovery may turn out being didn't matter. What mattered was that it was enough to keep me going. At the moment, I was back to square one. I didn't have enough fragments for another summon, which meant I had to do Celestial Pillars all over again. I wasn't too worried about it though, as I knew I could pump out all the pillars in less than an hour. Once the pillars were done, I'd have around 5 or 6 summons to work with, which I was confident would be enough. Right away, I made my way over to the Lunatic Cultists. With the daybreak, the fight was a complete breeze, and it was now time for the pillars. Once again, the star pillar spawned directly on top of me, so I immediately began grinding out star cells. I honestly have no idea why I struggled with this pillar previously. This shit was so damn easy, and in only 2 deaths, the pillar was dead. The next pillar I wanted to fight was the nebula pillar, which unlike the stars pillar, didn't get a single bit easier. For some reason, Relogic decided the nebula pillar was the perfect home for the most annoying ass enemies ever thought up by mankind, so I basically just struggled through the 100 kills. Surprisingly, it only took about 8 minutes to finish off the nebula pillar, and after cleaning up the many tombstones scattered across my arena, I was ready for the 3rd pillar, the solar pillar. Considering how this pillar went before, like, this should be mad easy. I mean, it can't possibly be any worse than the nebula pillar, right? You know, for the first 50 kills, the pillar wasn't actually that bad. After dying to a giant tortoise prior to even getting a single kill, I thought that would set the tone for the entire pillar to come. Lucky for me, it only set the tone for half, as it was purely the last 50 kills that sucked ass. For the initial half of the solar pillar, I was able to get behind it and grind out kills in the desert biome where nothing was really going on. Because the nebula pillar had killed off all my NPCs at spawn, I wasn't able to use any pylons, so I had to loop over top of the pillar and land on the other side. Seems pretty easy, why don't you just try that again? Jokes aside, I definitely should have kept trying, as this side was hell, but after many deaths and many attempts at trying to get the stupid ass pylons to work, the solar shield was down, and let me tell you, this felt real good. And just like that, the hard part was out of the way. Only 1 pillar left, then it was time for Moonlord. Yeah, right. Instantly when I returned home, I recognized that I was almost out of healing potions. This meant that on top of the 30-minute pillar grind I just did, I would now need to commit another 20 minutes to farming some random ass boss. By this point in the run, I just wanted to start fighting Moonlord again, but there was no way around this. Initially, I thought the wizard sold greater health potions, however a quick trip over to him swiftly put that idea to rest. Afterwards, I checked out the wiki to see if there was any better way to obtain greater health potions, but unless I wanted to farm pixies forever, there was nothing. I had to fight a boss, and while looking back, I had so many easy options to choose from. Ultimately, I settled on Duke Fishron. I said to myself, Fishron is one of the easiest summons to obtain. It would take about 5 minutes to get the summons I needed, and once I was done farming Fishron, I'd be left with around 30 greater health potions. Although Fishron the easiest summon to come by, he certainly wasn't the easiest boss. Even with the daybreak, I knew that all it would take was a few mistakes, and I was dead. But after a small amount of hesitation, I grabbed the essential buffs and headed to the ocean. I already had 2 summons left over from before, so as long as I was able to get both kills, I'd be satisfied. I started the first fight, and as to be expected, the daybreak was completely shredding him. The first 2 phases were not even close, but they had never really concerned me to begin with. It was the 3rd phase I was most worried about, and even though I knew the pattern by now, I panicked like an idiot. With only 3,000 damage left to go, I was dead. At this point, morale was at an all-time low. I was this close to fighting Moonlord. The last thing I wanted to do was farm for a bunch of lame-ass health potions. But I wasn't gonna quit now. Where were you when I was killing those pre-hard mode bosses? Where were you when I was waiting for that goblin army? Where were you when I was grinding out those pillars? Probably doing something actually productive. Shut the hell up. I had made it this far already, and I couldn't possibly stop now. So I traveled down to the mushroom biome, found 2 more truffle worms, and got my ass back out to that ocean. Bro, let me press jump! What? Oh shoot, my bad. Dude, who are you? Get the hell out of here! With 3 Duke Fishron kills out of the way, I now had more than enough health potions, and there was officially only one thing left to do. After selling off all the extra drops from Fishron, I made my way over to the Vortex Pillar and began grinding out Alien Queens. Despite my last 3 fights being pretty awful, I was actually excited for another attempt at Moonlord. Before fighting this last pillar, I rewatched parts of my previous Moonlord attempts to help me better understand the fight. Most notably, I was able to learn more about how the bolts functioned, which I was almost certain would come in handy. I'll talk more about that once I'm in the fight, but for now, it was was time to finish up the Vortex Pillar. With only a few more kills and some deaths along the way, the Vortex Shield was down. Just like before, I returned back to base to grab all the buffs I needed before killing the Vortex Pillar, so I wouldn't need to rush during the minute countdown. As I waited for the rainbow to take out the last bit of health from the Vortex Pillar, I briefly healed up, and once the pillar was dead, collected all the Vortex fragments. All I had to do now was get into position, to which after about 30 seconds, Moonlord was finally summoned. The first thing I noticed was I started this fight on the right side of the arena instead of the left, and this was for a reason. When I had looked back at my previous attempts, I was able to determine that the bolts follow a distinct pattern. Every time the top eye opens and closes, both the top and right eye shoot. Between each action, the left eye shoots. Yeah, unpredictable boss right here. I have no idea why this took me so long to figure out, but that's besides the point. The point is, after each death ray, the way the pattern works out is that the left eye shoots first, and the other two follow shortly after. When I was primarily moving to the right, once the death ray occurred, I would always end up being closest to the eye I was about to shoot, which basically guaranteed I'd get hit. When moving to the left, however, I'm always furthest away from the eye I was about to shoot, which actually gives me a chance of dodging the bolts. This, on top of the fact that I was no longer getting caught off guard by other random bolts during the fight, meant that I was literally having zero problem surviving. All that was left to do now is to try and kill all three eyes at once, and because the core phase is a complete joke, I would have this fight in the bag. I mean, come on, of course that's not what happened. Somehow I managed to get hit by 3 different spheres in a span of 12 seconds, bringing me all the way from full health down to being 1 hit away from death. With my health potion still being on cooldown, I really had no way to recover, and only a few minutes later, I was killed by a bolt. Just like that, the fight was completely thrown away, and surprisingly, I wasn't even mad about it. This was by a long shot my best Moonlord fight so far, and I was confident I could kill him with another attempt. With no time to waste, I crafted all my buffs, crafted the Celestial Sigil, and only a few minutes later, summoned Moonlord again. Well, here we are, another Moonlord attempt. This time around, there were no new big discoveries or strategies I'm implementing, but based on the last run, it was very clear that I didn't need any of that. For me, Moonlord was only ever difficult because I had never really spent the time learning how to fight him, but now that I truly understand how his attacks work, honestly, he's easy as hell. Although I mainly highlighted my knowledge on the bolts, as these were by far the most impactful attack, throughout all my different Moonlord battles, I was able to learn a ton about all his other attacks as well. For example, the Phantasmal Spheres, which always come right before a death ray, and as long as you jump late enough, are never a problem. Or something I didn't cover at all, the Phantasmal Eyes. I remember these things being such a pain in the ass in previous runs, but in this run, I was quickly able to recognize that they literally can't move at an upwards angle. Everything relating to Moonlord was now mapped out in my head, and needless to say, I was no longer as confident I could kill Moonlord here. I was certain. With the top eye beginning to get low, it was time to shift my priorities to the right hand, which up until this point has basically been left untouched due to me moving left the whole fight. Initially, I tried racking up damage only during the death ray loop so I could remain on the left side, but this would have taken all day. I had to move over to the right side, and although I knew this would result in me getting hit occasionally, it didn't matter. Playing from the left side had been working out so well that I've remained at max health for the majority of the fight. And even if I did get in a pickle, I had a health potion off cooldown if needed. Lucky for me, I didn't have to worry about that though, as for whatever reason, Moonlord completely whiffed every single shot. In only one death ray cycle, I had the right eye just where I wanted it, and I was ready to move on to the core phase. I killed the top eye, killed the right eye, and after about 20 seconds of not realizing the core was opened, I finished off the left eye, and the core phase had officially started. I mean, do we really gotta do this shit again? Like, this isn't even interesting. I did it. Moonlord is finally defeated. Wait, I beat him. Why isn't the music stopped? No shot! No, goddammit! I had done it. I beat the entirety of Terraria as a wolf. And without armor, too. If you made it to the end of this video, you have no idea how much I appreciate it. This has taken me so much time to make, but in the process, I've learned a ton about everything that goes into it, and I'm excited to start working on some other ideas. Feel free to leave any thoughts on this video in the comments, whether it's criticism, a question, or something completely random. I always enjoy responding to them, and sometimes they can really help me out. As for the actual challenge, it surprisingly wasn't that bad. If I ever did decide to do a video like this again in the future, you can expect me to turn it up a few notches. Other than that, that's about all I have to say. Seriously, thank you all so much for watching. It really does mean a lot, and I'll see you all in the next one.